Most people over 60 think they're behind financially, constantly comparing themselves to some imaginary number they saw in an article, heard from a coworker, or picked up from a financial show years ago that had absolutely nothing to do with their actual life. That comparison rarely tells the truth. It just creates a quiet, nagging sense of falling short, even for people who are genuinely doing fine. Here's the truth. Being financially fine after 60 isn't about hitting a specific net worth, and it's not about matching some number that was never built for your situation in the first place. It's about a handful of quieter signs, patterns in how you handle debt, income, emergencies, and even how you feel day to day that matter far more than the size of your account balance. Here are 7 signs that actually mean you're doing better than you think, starting with one that has nothing to do with how much money you actually have saved. Sign number 1. You could cover a $1,000 emergency without panic. This sounds simple, almost too simple to matter, but it's actually one of the strongest indicators of real financial stability. Think about what an unexpected $1,000 expense actually looks like at this stage of life. A car repair, a plumbing issue, an unplanned trip to urgent care, a broken appliance in the middle of summer. These things happen to everyone eventually, and how you respond to them says more about your financial health than almost anything else. If you can pull that money from savings without touching a credit card, without feeling a wave of dread, and without needing to rearrange your entire budget for the next 2 months, that's a real sign of stability. It means you're not living so close to the edge that one unexpected bill turns into a spiral of debt. A lot of people who look financially comfortable on paper, with a decent income and a nice home, actually don't have this cushion. They're one surprise expense away from real stress. If you do have it, even if it's not a huge amount sitting there, even if it's just enough to comfortably absorb a mid-sized emergency, that's worth recognizing as genuine financial health, not something to dismiss just because your account isn't overflowing. Sign number 2. Your debt is manageable or gone entirely. Notice this isn't saying your debt has to be completely gone, because for a lot of people over 60, that's simply not realistic. And that's okay. What actually matters is whether the debt you do have is manageable within your income, rather than something that's quietly working against you every single month. Here's what manageable actually looks like. Your monthly payments across everything, mortgage, car, any remaining credit card balances, take up a reasonable portion of your income, not the majority of it. You're not relying on one credit card to pay off another. You're not watching balances creep up every month because minimum payments aren't covering what you're spending. If you have a mortgage still, it's on track to be paid off within a reasonable time frame, not stretching decades into your 80s. On the other hand, if you're carrying high-interest credit card debt that never seems to shrink, or you find yourself putting everyday expenses like groceries or gas on a card because cash flow feels tight, that's a sign worth paying attention to, and it's worth addressing sooner rather than later. But if your debt situation feels controlled, predictable, and doesn't create anxiety when you think about it, that's a genuine sign you're in a stronger position than you might be giving yourself credit for. A lot of people assume any debt at all means they're behind. That's simply not true. It's the relationship between your debt and your income that actually tells the story.
Sign number 3. You know your exact monthly number. This one might be the most overlooked sign on this entire list because it has nothing to do with how much money you have and everything to do with how well you understand your own situation. Your exact monthly number means you know, down to a fairly precise figure, what it actually costs you to live your life every month. Not a rough guess, not somewhere around 3,000, I think. An actual number you could state confidently if someone asked. This matters more than people realize because financial stress often isn't really about not having enough money. It's about uncertainty. It's the vague, nagging feeling of not being totally sure if you're okay, because you've never actually sat down and calculated it clearly. People who know their number tend to feel calmer about money in general, even if that number is higher than they'd like, simply because uncertainty is gone. They know exactly what they need coming in every month to cover their life, and they can measure that against what's actually coming in from Social Security, pensions, investments, or any other income source. If you've done this, if you genuinely know your monthly number and you know how it compares to your income, that clarity itself is a sign of financial health, separate entirely from how large or small the number is. And if you haven't done this yet, it's genuinely one of the simplest exercises that brings immediate peace of mind, because most people find their number is smaller and more manageable than the vague anxiety in their head was telling them.
Sign number 4. You haven't had to touch your long-term savings during a market downturn. This sign is specifically about resilience, not wealth. Markets go up and down, that's simply how investing works, and anyone with money in stocks or retirement accounts over 60 has almost certainly lived through at least one significant downturn, whether that was a sharp correction or a longer stretch of a declining or flat market. The real test isn't whether the downturn happened, it's what you did during it. If you were able to leave your long-term investments alone during a rough stretch, continuing to live off your regular income sources, your cash reserves, or your more stable, lower-risk holdings, without being forced to sell investments at a loss just to cover monthly expenses, that's an enormous sign of financial strength. It means your day-to-day life isn't dependent on the market cooperating with you at all times. A lot of people don't realize how important this is until they're in the middle of a downturn and panic selling investments low simply because they need cash right then. That single mistake, selling out of fear during a decline rather than being able to ride it out, is one of the most damaging things that can happen to a retirement plan. If you've made it through a downturn without needing to do that, whether that was through having enough cash on hand, having predictable income from other sources, or simply having built enough cushion that market swings don't force your hand, that's a real sign of financial resilience, not something to overlook just because none of the individual pieces feels large on its own. Sign number 5. Your income sources are diversified rather than depending entirely on one thing. This one tends to separate people who feel financially secure from people who feel financially exposed, even when their actual dollar amounts might look similar on paper. Think about what it means to rely on a single income source after 60. If your entire monthly income comes from just Social Security, or just one pension, or just withdrawals from a single investment account, you're essentially betting everything on that one source holding up exactly as expected indefinitely. If anything changes with that source, a reduced benefit, an underperforming market stretch, a pension fund running into trouble, there's no backup to lean on while you adjust. Compare that to someone whose income comes from a mix of places. Maybe that's Social Security combined with a small pension, plus some withdrawals from savings, plus a bit of part-time or freelance income or rental income from a property. When income comes from several directions instead of one, a dip in any single source doesn't threaten the whole picture. It's a much steadier position to be in, even if the total dollar amount ends up being similar to someone relying entirely on one source. Sign number 6. You've actually had the healthcare cost conversation rather than avoiding it. This is one of those signs that has nothing to do with how much money is currently in your accounts and everything to do with whether you faced one of the biggest financial risks of aging head-on instead of pushing it aside because it feels uncomfortable to think about. Healthcare costs in retirement are significant, and they tend to increase, sometimes sharply, as people get older. This includes things like Medicare premiums, supplemental insurance, prescription costs, and potentially long-term care down the road, which can be one of the largest and most unpredictable expenses anyone faces later in life. A lot of people simply avoid thinking about this entirely, assuming they'll figure it out when the time comes, or hoping it just won't be as bad as the stories they've heard. But people who are actually doing well financially after 60 tend to have done the opposite. They've looked at their Medicare options and understand what they're actually covered for. They've thought through what happens if a serious health issue arises, whether that's through long-term care insurance, a dedicated healthcare savings fund, or simply a clear understanding of what family support might look like if needed. They've had honest conversations, sometimes uncomfortable ones, with a spouse or family members about what happens if extended care becomes necessary. If you've done this, even if the plan isn't perfect or fully finalized, that's a genuine sign of strength, because facing this risk directly, rather than avoiding it, is exactly what protects people from being financially blindsided by it later.
And now, sign number 7, the sign that ties everything else on this list together. You feel generally in control of your money, rather than constantly anxious about it. This is the emotional signal underneath all the practical ones, and in many ways, it's the most important sign on this entire list because it reflects everything happening underneath the surface. Financial security isn't just a number, it's a feeling, and that feeling comes directly from the 6 signs before this one. When you can handle an emergency without panic, when your debt feels manageable, when you know your exact number, when you've weathered a downturn without being forced into bad decisions, when your income isn't riding entirely on one source, and when you've faced healthcare costs honestly instead of avoiding them. The natural result is a sense of control. Not the absence of any worry at all, because a small amount of financial awareness is healthy and normal at any age. But the difference between healthy awareness and constant underlying anxiety is enormous, and it's usually the clearest sign of where someone actually stands. If you generally feel like you understand your situation, like you're making decisions rather than just reacting to whatever happens, and like money isn't the thing sitting in the back of your mind every single day, that feeling itself is one of the strongest indicators that you're doing well financially after 60, regardless of what your exact account balance says. If this video helped you feel a little more confident about where you stand, hit that like button so more people can see it. Subscribe for more videos like this one, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.